think the best was when we made the Toy Story glider program, which started well and then went wrong. For example, we built it in a hangar on an airfield, and the rain during those days when we were building it was terrible, and we had the students helping us, but they didn't get up until 11 o'clock, and the hangar leaked. And then it started going well. We invented the dropping mechanism, and then we went to fly the glider for real, and it went completely wrong. The weather was terrible, the guidance system wouldn't work properly, and it went something like a mile out to sea. It was supposed to go over 20 miles, and then landed in the drink, and the cloud was down to about 1,000 feet, and we had to give up and go back to the hotel. But the joyous moment was the next morning. We got up and it was exactly like this, perfectly still and perfectly clear. And everybody was about to go home, weren't they? We quickly rang around everybody, including the 2 helicopters that we'd borrowed, and said, can we just have another go? Otherwise we don't have an ending. And it worked perfectly.
And it flew, what, 23, 4 nautical miles or something?
Yeah, and still had enough altitude to lap Lundy, or Clundy as we called it, because we were pretending it was in Wales. Yeah, it did sort of 2 or 3 laps of the island with altitude to spare. It was just fantastic.
And it looked brilliant. And I think I must hold the record in that film on that first disastrous attempt for the largest number of expletives for a children's Christmas TV special. Because everything went wrong. The boat crew, well, we picked going from Ilfracombe for the precise reason that we could get on this boat if the tide was in or the tide was out, because it had a key. And of course they moored at the completely wrong place, and so we set the helicopters off with a glider. We pegged it down to the quayside, and of course there was no bloody boat. So by the time we got out there, the glider was already about to crash into the sea. It was miserable and awful. But another thing I think which I'd forgotten about was just how tight the budgets were. We literally had no money, and to scrape together, and in fact, like all of the Toy Stories, it was real jeopardy. None of it was made up. We came so close to ballsing every single one of those films up, and we just got lucky with it in the end.
So far?
Yes.
I mean, as a measure of how desperate and how cheapskate we were on some of those. On the glider film, we had one of the people working with us was another Tom, and he was only about 18 at the time, wasn't he? And he was the guy who went up in the helicopter to track the glider, and he had the abort button if it was going wrong, so he could make it deliberately crash into the sea, if it started heading off towards an orphanage or something. And it was a Saturday when the day was like this, wasn't it? And we realized we could have another go at it. And he had a job at Sainsbury's to help make ends meet and to pay various expenses for his education things. And I had to ring up Sainsbury's and say, you can't have Tom today, we need him to sit in the helicopter.
Yeah, and the other
helicopter. I had to apologise for that.
The other guy was meant to be taking a couple to a wedding.
That's right.
And so we had to get it done, otherwise we would have ruined someone's wedding. It's just really very close. But
yeah, it's incredible.
I agree. I think that was pretty much the highest point. What was the lowest point, do you think?
It was in Japan when you made me walk down those 250 icy steps. We went to the Holy Mountain where I went up with the monk. But to get to the bridge where you see the first piece to camera of me saying I'm crossing this bridge and now I leave behind my worldly concerns and I enter the holy space and all the rest of it. But to get there, you had to go down. It was about 250 steps, little steps this big, and they were completely coated in sheet ice that had formed. It sort of had an ice meniscus on it. So you had to go down. I mean, Dan Harrison got down quite quickly because he had some sort of golf shoe type things on. Like, but I just had a pair of worn out trainers as usual. And I couldn't stand on this thing. I had to put one foot on, very gingerly bring the other foot on. And I daren't risk falling over because I might break my arm or something, and then we'd be totally screwed. And how long did it take me to get down? 3 hours?
Yeah, it wasn't just you though. It was really scary, and carrying kit as well. So you can't.
Yeah, I'm amazed we got down there without a broken bone.
Yeah, that was dodgy.
And then at the end we had to come up them again to get back to the car.
I mean, we have had some other notable low points. I mean, when we built the Meccano motorcycle to go round the Isle of Man's TT circuit the night before, and we were kind of basically using a little window in between 2 Grand Prix races that were going off, and so we had this time, and we'd been working all that day, and the engineering team putting the finishing touches to the bike. We'd road tested it, we'd driven it around, it worked. And it must have been about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and we just got back to the hotel and was just about to have a pint. And I think it was fish and chips or something. And I was really looking forward to it. And then the phone rang. This is the 9 o'clock at night before 9 a.m. Race time, to find that Sim, our genius engineer, had somehow collapsed the entire front forks. The entire front wheel was in pieces, had buckled, and the whole Meccano thing was a disaster. And we were stuck on this island. We didn't know if we had enough bits and pieces to fix it, and they just had to work throughout the night, almost against the clock.
Yeah.
And somehow
they got it back together. But it was, I mean, I saw a picture of it. It was completely, it didn't just disintegrate, it had all buckled, didn't it? The forks had sort of gone like that, and then the wheel had, and it was, I think they had to take the original bits and hammer them back into shape and then rebuild it, and they did it. But all the time I was riding it, I was thinking, is it going to do that again at any second? It didn't go very fast, the Meccano bike. I think the fastest we went was about, well, it was under 20 miles an hour, wasn't it? But that's still quite fast if your motorcycle made up out of very sharp, small bits of metal suddenly collapses. So it was a lot more nerve-wracking than it looked.
Ooh.
I think that's a Bristol F2B, isn't it?
Are you sure? Yeah.
Or is it a DH9? It's a
oh no, that's a bird.
Oh yeah. Makes a funny noise.
It does, doesn't it? What can we say? We have kind of, there are intentions, if we can, to go off and make another Our Man In.
It's the hardest thing in the world to make under COVID restrictions. It's actually even harder than Grand Tour. Even though Grand Tour has a much bigger crew and so on, we can sort of keep that fairly contained, but you can't really make a travel show without meeting people and going to events that have lots of people at them. So I'm sure we will do it eventually, but it's still a way off.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're aiming to go and shoot something this summer if we can. But obviously it depends on what happens, really. It's the weirdest thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
This entire COVID thing.
Very odd. And cooking, well, I mean, have you seen it? We don't know what's going to happen to that. Well, I think one of the things we've learned is that we were right when we did Man Lab, that we should expose some of the process, and also we shouldn't expect in the modern world for people to believe in the magic of television. It just isn't magic anymore. It's simply a medium, and everybody knows what's really happening, and you shouldn't try and do those magic edit points that say, magically the dog escaped or whatever. Yeah,
and also, I agree, but also I think what's good about it is it's very democratic. I think that if you've got a nice idea for a film, there's absolutely no reason why you can't just go and make your film and upload it and see what happens. And in fact, we tried to make a film involving no crew at one point, where we just asked people to randomly show up and film random bits, and we try and make it work as a whole. But obviously the technicians union got very cross about that.
They didn't like that idea at all.
Yeah, and also I think that it needn't be as complicated as all that. I think there's a simplicity about stuff which is, if anything, better than overcomplicating stories, overcomplicating things. Keep it simple, and it can be just as entertaining as anything which is overthought and overwritten. And
yeah, I think it's proved really, or it's reinforced the idea that in the first instance, TV is a thinking and writing job to begin with. That's where it starts. If you've got an interesting idea and an interesting way of showing it or talking about it, then you're fine. And also, I mean, I remember saying in a thing I wrote hundreds of years ago that naturally we would end up in a state where the definition of TV could be that one person makes a film for one other person to watch, because there's no reason why content couldn't be that specific. And I mean, that's probably rubbish, but we're sort of heading that way a bit. There are some things on YouTube and indeed on Drive Tribe and Food Tribe that you could consider successful because they're good and the people who watch them love it, but it might only be 300 or 400 people see it in its entire lifetime. But I don't think that matters. There's no scheduling, there's infinite capacity for it, and there's an infinitely varied viewership.
And also, I don't think it's cynical. There's a kind of a certain thing within a format that's still drawing in viewers on broadcasting platforms. These are films made by filmmakers for that purpose. And then there's, YouTube or that kind of freedom of choice. And I think it's, even I've, for instance, watched a 22-minute video on some bloke explaining how to tile a bathroom floor, because that's what I'm going to be doing. And it's so refreshing. I mean, it goes on a bit, sure, but at the same time, he obviously feels the need to communicate that and is doing it to the best of his ability. So as a result, it doesn't feel cynical and set up or anything like that. It's just a bloke telling you something that's useful for you.
Well, you could always rip it, shorten it, and put some Rachmaninoff over it. It's going on a bit.
Yeah.
I sympathise.
Ooh.
Cheese.
No, cheese was fairly epic. It's got a life of its own now.
Cheese has turned into a sort of separate entity.
I shouldn't say mail time, because otherwise
No.
we'll have to see it again. But there were some pretty fantastic discoveries.
There were some good bits in mail time. I was very. There was one film where Lucy Brown smiled, which I thought was quite momentous. And I know a lot of people commented on it, and I liked doing when we did the Mirai versus the Tesla.
Yes.
And we had to make that argument with my self-work, which
Yes.
was that was a bit of TV trickery, but Tom had to be me whilst I was actually me, but then he had to be me, the other me, while I was the me that Tom had been, so that we could get both sides of it. But it was quite difficult. It was quite difficult to do it and keep a straight face because it's just so stupid.
Yeah, for the other ones, ham versus spam, because I learned something that day, and I learned that actually spam was better than ham in that particular context of salad cream.
It is.
Which I never thought I'd need to know, but I do now.
And I learned in making one of those sandwich videos that Lurpak was invented in 1901 or 3. Was it 3? Was it 1901 or 1903? It is actually 1901. I learned that. Lurpak. I actually said Lurpak spreadable butter invented in 1903 or 1. But that's not actually true. The spreadable version, I think, if I remember rightly, was invented by a couple of Spanish food scientists in the 70s.
Right.
That's a relatively recent thing, but the Lurpak emblem emerged in 1901 or 3 when a load of Danish butter makers sort of formed a cooperative.
Well, there you are.
A bit like the spice growers of Zanzibar, it's that sort of thing. So, yes, all that work, and I've got an idea of roughly when the Lurpak emblem was invented, and me saying cheese has been sent to space, or is being sent to space. That's the legacy of all our work.
Yeah, do you realise that the probability is when centuries hence, when you're long gone, the only thing that will remain is you saying cheese versus cheese. That's probably it.
If anything, it will be that.
You'll be the cheese man.
Yeah. Like, comment, subscribe.
Right.
Like, comment, subscribe. Watch Lucy's videos behind the scenes. Like, comment, subscribe. Anything you'd like to add, Tom? Like, comment, subscribe.
No comment.